I gathered some of the rarest Pokemon mechanics that you probably don't know, and I'm going to be sharing them right now. These interactions are pretty rare, and I only discovered these while making other videos or in my comment sections. For example, Hawlucha has a signature move it rarely uses called Flying Press. It's unique because it combines fighting and flying type effectiveness. This gives the move its very own type chart of what it hits super effectively and what resists or is immune to it. But this also gives the move some other weird quirks. Even though it's combined fighting and flying coverage, for all other purposes this is treated like a fighting type move, which means it can only receive stab on a fighting type mon, won't be boosted by any items that boost flying type moves like Sharp Beak or Sky Plate, and won't activate a Cobra Berry. However, what is super cool is it will activate a Chople Berry if the move is super effective due to the flying type's influence. This means on Pokemon who aren't weak to fighting and even resist it, but are weak to Flying Press, will have a Chople Berry activate and reduce the damage. It also applies when a Flying Press user is under the effects of Electrify, as it will become an electric and flying type move. A Pokemon not weak to electric, but weak to flying, like fighting and bug types, can use a Wakan Berry to lessen damage they take from an electrified Flying Press. And if you want to get really obscure, I think this is the only way to have a super effective normal type move. If you swap the ability Normalize onto Hawlucha, then the move will become a normal and flying type move. This will be able to hit fighting, bug, and grass types super effectively. So you can actually use the Chillin' Berry to reduce a super effective normal type hit in this situation. Do you know the move Telekinesis? Well, for the half of you watching who are familiar, this move actually has a pretty funny interaction with certain Pokemon. What this move does is raise the target in the air for 3 turns. Under the effect of Telekinesis, all moves used against it will bypass accuracy checks. But this doesn't include Oko moves. The target will also be immune to ground type moves and Arena Trap. It can affect dark types as a psychic type status move, but it cannot affect the Pokemon Diglett, Dugtrio, Sandygast, Palossand, and Mega Gengar. Yeah, just those guys. It can affect regular Gengar by the way, but if it Mega Evolves then the effect disappears. It's easy to deduce that this is due to the Mon's designs requiring them to be on the ground, but it would be funny to see Dugtrio ripped out of its hole so we can finally see what is lurking on the other side. But I think that's a pretty interesting mechanic that you would never really see in game, since the use of Telekinesis is basically 0, and then using them on one of these select few Mons in particular would be even more rare. A more common move with an interesting mechanic is Dragon Darts. This mechanic isn't as obscure, but this might just be the smartest move in Pokemon. In singles, this move acts like a normal multi-strike move that will just hit the opponent twice, but in doubles, this move acts way differently. The first hit will go to the original target, and then the second hit will attack into the other slot. This is usually the case, but when I say this move is smart, I mean it. This is why. If you target this move into a Mon who would take no damage, both strikes are directed at the other Pokemon. This can be if you target into a Fairy type who would be immune, if it would be immune from an ability like Wonder Guard, if a target used any protection moves, if a target used a move like Fly or Dig and is semi-invulnerable. And not only this, but it is also smart enough to know if it's going to miss a target. Because if it were to miss due to accuracy or evasion, then it will target the other spot instead. It also won't target into an empty spot like a Tatsugiri that's been sucked into a Dondozo. This move isn't blocked by a Wide Guard either. And maybe the coolest interaction with this move is if a Dragapult doesn't use it. If it is used by a Prankster user via Metronome or Copycat, it will acknowledge any dark type that would be immune to the attack and hit into the other target twice. The next move with a quirky mechanic is Helping Hand. This move increases the damage done by an ally by 50% for that turn. A pretty popular move in VGC play, but in Generation 4 only, this move boosted confusion damage. This means if you were to use Helping Hand on your confused ally, and it ended up hitting itself, the confusion hit on yourself would receive that 50% Helping Hand boost. This was changed in Generation 5. While I'm talking about Helping Hand, it should be mentioned that the effect can stack in generations with triple battles. You can use multiple Helping Hands targeting the same Mon to give a 125% boost for 2 Helping Hands and a staggering 237.5% boost if there are 3 Helping Hands. Which I'm not sure how this would happen unless this move was used by opposing Pokemon in a Horde Encounter who have a crazy Helping Hand strategy to annihilate you. Unfortunately, this strategy doesn't work in Terra Raid battles. But speaking of Horde Encounters, there are certain interactions with them that are pretty sweet lore-wise you might not have known about. While it makes sense that you would see a Miltank in a Tauros Horde encounter, or a female Nidoran mixed in with a male Nidoran encounter, there are some Pokemon species with no directly clear relation that appear in other Horde encounters, some of which turn into ugly situations. First, we have some X and Y Horde situations. You may see a Carbink mixed in with a Roggenrola Horde, as they, along with Geodude, all chill in caves and, I quote, compare their hard bodies to settle which has the hardest body. Nice. I mean, what's better than this? Guys being dudes. Sudowoodo can be spotted in Trevenant hordes as they sometimes share a habitat. There are a few more mixed hordes that don't really have an explanation to them. Then there are the enemy species you encounter together. Possibly the most known rivalry is Zangoose and Seviper. These two hate each other historically, and in game this is shown as well. If you encounter a Zangoose horde, there will always be a Seviper, and vice versa, depending on which Gen 6 game you're playing. Instead of attacking Yormon, they will only attack each other until one of the species is eradicated from that battle. This is also true of Heatmor and Durant, who are also rivals, with Heatmor preying upon Durant by, and I quote again, using their very hot flame-covered tongues to burn through Durant's steel bodies and consume their insides. But Durant forms hordes against Heatmor to try and fend them off. This can make it hard to catch these lone Pokemon in the Horde encounters, as for some of them, this was the only method of encountering them, and you can't throw a ball if there are multiple Mons on the field. So you had to find a way to KO the other 4 Mons, while keeping the one alive if you wanted to catch it. This next one was actually brought to my attention from a viewer comment on my last video on negative priority moves, which you should check out. It has to do with Toucan's signature move, Beak Blast. This move charges at the beginning of the turn and executes after all other attacks that aren't lower than -3 priority. Contact with this Pokemon during the charging phase will result in a burn. The cool thing about this move is the charging phase will happen regardless of the user's status. So if Beak Blast would be prevented by paralysis, confusion, or attraction, the charging will still go off as normal. And if the user is asleep, it can still heat up its beak and cause a burn even if it doesn't wake up to actually use Beak Blast. Another cool aspect is this move is blocked by the bulletproof ability, but can still burn from making contact during its charge. Thanks for that cool tidbit that let me look more into this move. Comment any obscure mechanics you know of to potentially be featured in a follow-up video. The move Torment prevents the target from using the same move twice in a row until the target switches. But moves like Rollout, Ice Ball, Thrash, and Outrage that lock the user in for a certain amount of turns will be allowed to execute during Torment. If these moves miss or are interrupted, then they will not be allowed to be selected the following turn. In Pokemon Emerald, if you hit yourself in confusion while using Torment, you can select the last move you use, as it acts like hitting yourself as using a different move. The last, and probably my favorite interactions we're going to cover in this video, has to do with abilities. And these are particularly the interaction they have with the ability Mold Breaker and phasing moves. Normally, a Pokemon with the ability Levitate is immune to entry hazards like spikes and toxic spikes, but if a Pokemon is hit with a phasing move, such as Roar or Dragon Tail, by a Mold Breaker user, and the replacement has the ability Levitate, Mold Breaker will cause that Pokemon to take any spikes damage and become poisoned by toxic spikes. If you switch a Levitator in on the Mold Breaker user, you will not take the damage. But the phasing effect of dragging in another Pokemon is considered a part of the move and therefore ignores abilities. It would also let a levitating poison type, like Weezing, absorb the toxic spikes if phased in, which it normally would be unable to do. This made me think, what other abilities can we test out with this interaction? So I looked down the list of abilities to find potential suitors. What I found is this ability can let a Pokemon with immunity become poisoned, although the ability will cure the poisoning at the end of the turn. But the ability Purifying Salt, which protects from status conditions but doesn't cure them, is able to be bypassed this way. There are abilities like White Smoke and Clear Body that normally will block stat drops from sticky webs, but if switched in this way, they will have their speed stat lowered. The same goes for Corviknight's Mirror Armor. If Gravity is active and Corviknight switches in on Sticky Web, it will reflect the speed drop. But if a Mold Breaker Mon forces it in, it will have to take the speed drop for itself. Contrary Pokemon like Serperior normally can switch into Sticky Webs for a speed buff, but they will receive the speed drop if switched in this way. Emergency Exit and Wimp Out Pokemon will not be forced to swap out if they are taken below half by the spikes damage. However, if they are taken under half by the poison damage that occurs at the end of the turn, they will end up switching out. There were a few more abilities I tested that didn't have their effects nullified. Screen Cleaner still removes screens, Poison Heal will still heal at the end of the turn, and surprisingly, Magic Guard still blocks the spikes damage from happening. Defiant will still raise attack if switched in like this. I assume competitive is the same. And for fun, I tested Anticipation to see if it would still proc, and it did. There might be more abilities that can be bypassed by this method of phasing, but those are the ones I thought of. Make sure to drop a comment on which of these you knew or didn't know, and if you have any other weird or uncommon mechanics, let me know. And if you like this video, make sure to check out this one next. Take it easy, buds.